The business group Business Unity SA confirming now it's going to court to try and challenge the regulations that were implemented by the Employment and Labour Minister Nomakosazana Meth around employment equity. The regulations provide targets for different sectors to try and force or perhaps encourage companies to transform. In other words, they're meant to ensure that companies do implement employment equity. But Busa says the way in which these regulations are being implemented is wrong. Several other groups, including the DA and the group Sakalika, have already lodged their own challenges. Khulekani Mate is the CEO at Busa. He joins us now. Khulekani, good afternoon to you. I really appreciate the time. Why are you challenging these regulations? What do you believe is wrong with them?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and thank you very much for the opportunity. So this is not a decision that we took lightly to approach the court. We took this decision after having tried several times to engage with the minister, to engage with the department to raise concerns. The concerns relate to a couple of things. Firstly, they relate to how the sectors to which these targets will apply were determined. And secondly, it related to the process by which the targets were developed. It relates to the data and methodology that was applied. And thirdly, it also related to whether the law was followed in determining these targets. In all of these issues, our contention is that the law was not followed. The process was a poor one, and therefore it resulted in targets that in some instances are quite irrational and unachievable. So having tried many times to engage the department and the minister and not really our calls and pleas not being heeded, we then took the decision to approach the court.
Okay, so from what you say, these are technical reasons that you are challenging it. Do you have a problem with the main aim, which is the transformation of our economy? I mean, I'm sure that you don't, but is this just moving too fast for you? Is that the real problem?
We do not have a problem with, in fact, we support transformation. We also support the principle of the setting of numerical targets. But what is an issue here is how the process was undertaken. And so we want to make it clear that whereas perhaps there are other cases out there of people who are challenging the very essence of transformation, that is not our argument. Our argument is that transformation is so important, it should not be compromised by not doing things properly and not following the right procedures that ought to be followed as we continue.
Okay, so I mean, I accept that procedure is important, of course it is. But basically, would you, if the minister came to you now and said, let's settle, is there a target or a set of targets that you would accept?
So rather than it being about a number, one or two numbers, as I've outlined a couple of things, it is how you get to these. And we've tried to propose methodologies by which you do this. So that you arrive. So just as an example, Stephen, the department uses in determining the targets what is often referred to as the economically active population, right? And say if the economic active population is X percentage, then the target should be set either at that or as close to that as possible. What that measure does not tell you is whether there are people in that population, that segment of the population, who have the relevant education that is required in those roles, who have the relative skills that are required in those roles, who have the relevant experience that is required in those roles. That's very, very rudimentary. And that's the first thing. The second thing is that you simply cannot ignore the supply side of this equation, i.e., is our education system producing the results, in other words, the skills that are required? Now, in determining these targets, these things were not taken into account. And because these things were not taken into account, a very rudimentary metric was used. It produced targets that are inappropriate. And so doing things properly both procedurally, but also methodologically following a scientific methodology that allows you to arrive at something that can be achieved is what we are asking for. And we're ready and willing to work with the department, but our requests were not listened to.
Okay, so Khulekani, just so that I don't misunderstand you, because it's quite easy to sort of oversimplify this, but we're talking here about transformation, and we're talking about race, okay? We're talking about, one of the dominant theme in our society. Are you suggesting then that what the department has done has given you targets, and you believe, and I'm sorry to be so blunt about this, but I don't think there's any way around it, that there are not enough black people with the right qualifications to meet those targets? I mean, that sounds, frankly, too blunt, but is that what you're saying?
It is also about the different sectors, right? So it's not just a general statement, it is also about different sectors. So, which is why we're saying that the determination of sectors is also important. And so what we've been asking the minister and the department to do is, rather than take very broad sectors and set targets at that level, you should disaggregate into subsectors, because different subsectors have different skills profiles currently, but also different skills requirements. Let me give you an easy example here. You have a broad sector called manufacturing, right? Subsectors of manufacturing would include, manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, manufacturing of automobiles, manufacturing of, food products, manufacturing of all sorts of other things. What the skills you require for these different subsectors are different. You may set a target that works easily for one part of these subsectors and quite difficult for the other. And when we raised this issue, at one point around 2023, the department seemed to be listening to this. They produced a document then, or a draft set of regulations that seemed to suggest that they were understanding this logic of subsector. And without any explanation, at the beginning of this year, all of that was removed. So this is why we say this is quite irrational. There's no explanation that is being done here. And we don't think that there is, the exercise of state power here is being done in a rational way and in a way that is lawful. Because there is that principle which needs to be protected. It's not enough just the fact that you have the power in law, but there is still a responsibility to exercise that power in a lawful manner. And Section 15A of this very act sets out the procedure and the process that must be followed. That was not done. And secondly, it must be rational. So in other words, you must be able to convince the other person that I have followed this process. This is the methodology that I've used to arrive at this. In this case, the methodology is very opaque, giving rise to what many sectors are saying. These regulations and targets are simply unachievable.
Khulekani Mate, I really appreciate the time. Thank you, the CEO at Business Unity, South Africa. Well, over the last few days, we have seen several more European countries deciding to recognize Palestine as a state. This is all happening during the United Nations General Assembly meeting that's underway in New York. In the last few days, we've seen the UK, Australia, Malta, Belgium, Luxembourg, several others saying they were recognizing the Palestinian state. France has also said it will recognize Palestine as a country. Israel's condemned the moves. It's currently attacking Gaza in what our government, and now many others, says is a genocide there. Well, the former ambassador, Dr. Kingsley Makobele, joins us now. He's an expert on international relations. Mr. Ambassador, good afternoon to you, sir. How important is this move by these countries to recognize Palestinian statehood? If you had said 5 years ago that Britain would recognize Palestine, I don't think I would have believed you.
Good afternoon, Stephen. It's really unprecedented. You're quite correct. But it has set up a domino effect in terms of this recognition. What remains to be done, Stephen, is what's going to happen with the actual territory. You recall, as we are talking now, Israel occupies 78% of what used to be the British Mandatory Palestine. And in terms of the agreement that established the State of Israel, 56% was given to Israel, 43% was given to Palestine. only 1%, which is Jerusalem, that remain under control of international community. So that's where the big challenge is going to be next as to what happens to the occupied land. We also know, as we are talking, Stephen, that about 500,000 people, Israelis, have occupied West Bank. And there are talks about the total seizure of West Bank by the Israeli government. So it's really uncharted territory at the same time.
Israel seems furious at what these European countries are doing, but bluntly, hasn't Israel created this? If it wasn't doing what it's doing in Gaza, if it wasn't committing what I think many people now see as a genocide, well, then these countries wouldn't be doing this. This is a direct response to Israel, is my question.
Absolutely. I think Israel has created a quagmire for itself. If you look at the civil society in these developed countries, the United Kingdom, Italy, France, and so the civil society have been up in arms about what they call is genocide going on in Gaza. And their governments have been quite mum at the beginning, but they are now compelled to come up and try to quell this building up of public discontent within their communities. But I don't think it's going to stop there, as I'm saying, Stephen. A lot of civil society members are going to want more out of this.
So you make a very interesting point about how unprecedented all of this is. But the key factor, of course, is that the US still supports Israel. And we all know how important that support is. And yet, I think it was The Economist over the weekend, that newspaper suggesting that, in fact, more and more Americans no longer support Israel. I mean, that would be a real shift.
You know, sometimes last year, Stephen, I did a bit of research on members of the legislature, both houses in the Capitol Hill. They were very divided in the middle in terms of the recognition and wanting the two-state solution. Now that Netanyahu is spreading the two-state solution, he's creating a big problem for himself in terms of keeping the cohesion of the US lawmakers to support him. But the public is also rising. Remember, the US public is not that gullible. They've been looking in terms of the media, what's going on in Gaza, and they are up in arms. They are lobbying their elected officials. Now, with the midterm election building up next year, you're likely to see a lot of changes. I've started to hear voices, even within the White House, really that are really discontent with the behavior of Netanyahu. I think this is what they didn't want to see, particularly leading up to elections. So Netanyahu is going to be in serious trouble, I think.
I remember, and I'm sure you remember, Mr. Ambassador, growing up with South Africa as being one of the most isolated countries in the world. And at the time, the apartheid government then basically invested in arms corps, in the military, all of the problems that created. Now, Israel, I mean, it really does remind me of that time for Israel, becoming more and more isolated, spending more and more of its money, more and more of its economy just going to weapons and going to war. The society becomes more and more isolated and, like happened here, more and more divided as well.
You know, President Trump, before coming to office during the campaigns, he said Israel has created a public relation nightmare for itself. As we are talking, Stephen, also UEFA is debating whether to really bar Israel from participating within the European football fraternity. There are other sanctions that are likely coming up. The Italians are under pressure to stop military shipments. Spain has done that already. They are not shipping any military equipment. Here in South Africa, pressure will be building up because South Africa keeps on sending large quantity of coals to Israel. So pressure will be building up. Colombia stopped shipping coals to Israel. So you're likely to see this isolationist Israel and the United States. And I think the US would at one stage dump Israel when they realize that the public has turned against them domestically. So I don't see the public within Israel to really accepting Israel as a pariah state, given the foundational principle of the state of Israel that was built on never again shall, human be disseminated in the manner in which they did during the Nazi war. So I'm really concerned about also the public within Israel. But Israel has shifted much more to the right. the left is gone. The Labour Party, as you know, it is gone. And I think it's left with the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. It never recovered since then.
Sure.
So it has shifted more to the right. It's not only Israel, Stephen. The world is gravitating towards the far right, not even the center right, the far right, which creates a huge problem.
Mr. Ambassador, Dr. Kingsley Makabele, I really appreciate the time, sir. Thank you, as you can tell, a former ambassador and an expert on international relations.